Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to be shooting myself in the foot in terms of gear and showing you guys how to take astrophotos without a tracker at all. And normally I wouldn't recommend you do this at all because a tracker is literally like the most important part of your setup, but a lot of people can't afford to get one. I know that's the situation I was in when I first started astrophotography, and I spent a lot of time doing untracked astro. So I'm going to give you guys my tips and show you how to do untracked astrophotography. So come along. We're going out to a dark sky site tonight. It's going to be Landers near Joshua Tree, California. So it'll be pretty good. I think we're probably going to be going for Orion as it sets. There's not a lot of good targets during the later parts of the night or galaxy season, so we're going to be trying to get a good untracked shot of the Orion Nebula. So hope you guys enjoy. What is up? So excuse the wind, I'm out here at G-Mars right now. It's incredibly windy here and it's going to get pretty cold tonight, but I just wanted to show you guys what I'm going to be using to do the untracked shots. The thing that's going to determine most of your image quality when you're doing untracked is the lens that you're using, and the most important thing is how fast it is. So this lens is a Rokinon 135mm f2 lens when wide open, and this is basically the cheapest, fastest, bestest lens, telephoto lens you can get for doing either untracked or any other kind of astrophotography with just a DSLR and a lens. So I would always heavily recommend this particular camera lens to anyone, but this is what we're going to be using to go for the shots tonight. And I don't know exactly how long of exposures I can take yet because that depends on the declination, but we will go through some trial and error and determine what the optimal exposure is for this lens. So yeah, now we just got to wait for the old dark. I'm going to be setting up the RH200 right next to it. Hopefully it's not too much of a wind sail and we can still get some good exposures because it is windy out here. All right guys, it's dark now. We're out here, we're all set up. Again, I've got just a normal tripod, a ball head. If you're trying this yourself, you can use any old DSLR camera, any will function just fine. And I have a Rokinon 135mm f2, which is the lens, probably the best lens I'm going to use for this task. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you're doing this is, well, first focus, and you can just do that pretty simply by live view focusing on a star. You basically turn on your camera, go into live view, and then if we zoom in enough, I'm sure it's quite hard to see. Yeah, so there's a star that comes in and out of focus. Relatively simple to do with live view. Not too much of a problem at all. Anyways, so you need to get your focus set. And after that's done, you have to deal with the problem of how do you pick your exposure time? And there's a lot of factors that impact how long your exposure needs to be. There's the focal length, the pixel size, and also the declination of where you're pointing in the sky. So basically, the less resolution you have, the more a star can move before your camera's sensor can tell. And the bigger the pixels and the smaller the focal length, the less resolution and the longer you can go. That's why you can shoot untracked with like a 14mm lens for 30 seconds and you will have marginal trailing at best, but something like this, you need much shorter exposures. Also, if you're pointing at higher declinations, you will be able to expose for much longer because the sky is a big circle basically, and if you get closer to the center of rotation, basically it takes a whole day for a star to go around this tiny bit of the sky. So it's actually moving slower, but closer to the equator, it will cover a huge ring around the sky in one single day. So you have to expose for shorter to not deal with trailing. Hey guys, so I figured I wanted to touch a bit more about what I just said there since I kind of went through it a bit fast, and it's kind of the crux of how you should be thinking about untracked images when you take them. So I've drawn a little whiteboard sketchy here for you guys. It's a grid. We can imagine each of these squares as a pixel on your camera's sensor. And this here is the image, the perfect image of a star. So our goal is to choose an exposure such that the perfect image of the star does not bleed over to the edge of multiple pixels so you can keep a round star shape. So there's going to be a couple things that obviously affect that, and it's going to be how much time we have to keep this star in this box. And the things that change that are, one, how big the box is. So if we have a camera with really small pixels, obviously we have less time to have the star move in this box. But if we have something with really large pixels, like an A7S with 9 micron pixels, obviously the star has a lot more time to move inside of the box before trailing becomes a problem. The other thing is we can change the speed of how fast this image of the star moves across the sensor, and that's obviously guided by the focal length. So the more zoomed in you are, say if you're at 4,000 millimeters, the star is only going to be on this pixel for less than a second probably. But if you're using a 14 millimeter lens, this image of the star will be on this pixel for a long time, maybe 20 seconds or so. So focal length will also have an effect on how long you can keep this in the box. The other important thing is where the star is in the sky. Not all stars in the sky move at the same speed, but they all move at the same angular rate. So since they all move at the same angular rate, the further away you get from the pole, their actual linear speed in the sky changes. So you can think about it like Polaris near the North Pole in the northern hemisphere only moves a tiny little bit over the course of a day. But the further radius you get out from Polaris, the faster it moves. So if we were going to, say, take pictures of Polaris untracked, this star would stay in the box for a really long time without a tracker. But say, if we imaged Orion or the Milky Way, this is going to be moving about as fast as possible. So we can use that to our advantage sometimes. For example, if we're imaging in Cygnus, you can go for much more time than somewhere in Orion or Sagittarius, for example. So when you can eke out more exposure time doing untracked, you should seek to do it. And you should keep in mind that you can go for longer exposures when you're closer to the poles. So I hope that helped illustrate what I just rapidly went through there earlier. So either you can deal with looking at online formulas and whatever to figure that out, or you can just do the guess and check method, which is what I like to do. So I just take a picture. This is a 3 and 2 whatever exposure, I can't tell. 3 seconds and something exposure. And there's very tiny trailing, and that's completely acceptable to me. So I've determined that that's okay for me. If you want to deal with perfect sharp stars, then you really just got to keep changing your exposure until they go away, and yeah, then it's not really a problem. So once you have your exposure figured out, your exposure length, you can pick your ISO. That's going to be dependent on what camera model you have, but you just need to Google what is the most noise efficient ISO for your camera. For my Canon 60, it's ISO 6400, so that's what I'm going to be going with. And of course, you want the widest aperture possible to collect the most light, so we're going to be going at f2. The next problem is taking tons of exposures like this is a pain in the butt if you're trying to do it one by one with clicking. So what you're going to want to have is an intervalometer, or if you're on Canon, you can use a hacked firmware like Magic Lantern, and that just automates the whole process of clicking the button over and over again. So you just set it up to run however many exposures, and of course, since you're not tracking, you will have to reframe the camera every couple minutes, and yeah, you just let it run and take all your photos. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. I'm targeting Orion tonight, and we're going to just be going for as many 3 second exposures as possible. So hopefully it works out. What's up, guys? So it's the morning after last night. I took a lot of data. The morning after. I tried to record the section earlier, but I was so tired and that it really didn't come out good. So we're re-recording it now. Anyways, it's flat time. I know a lot of you don't want to do it, but I will find you if you didn't take flats. I will come for you, and I will make sure you take them, because it's not, your pictures aren't going to be good if you didn't take flats. Isn't that right, Derek?
Flats changed my life.
Yeah, they turned him from a poor little boy into the man he is today, and you need flats. So we're going to take flats. I'm going to show you how to do it. It's really not that bad. There's too many clouds here to do it right now, so it's kind of a bad demonstration, but we're gonna go for it anyways. So just go to live view on your camera. It's really bright, so I don't know how well you can see this. And have your histogram on. And you just wanna change your exposure until your histogram looks like a little hump. A little bit of a hump. You see how it's a hump in the middle? That's literally all you have to do. You want to keep it at the same aperture you shot as, but it doesn't matter what the ISO is. It doesn't matter what the exposure length is. Just do whatever, and then just take like 15 of those, and then you have your flats done. It's really not that hard. So, okay, next part is the bias frames. So you want to be at the same ISO that you were shooting at. I was at 6400. And then go for the fastest shutter speed, and then just cover your front lens and just rattle off like 20 of them. And then that's it. That's all you have to do. It's like a minute to do all of this. I don't take darks. Most of the time it doesn't matter, and since the exposures are so short, the dark current really is irrelevant at this point. So you can skip darks in general for untracked images, I think. And yeah, so now we have calibration frames and all the lights. I'll see you guys back at the computer, and we'll get to editing this. Hello everyone, so I'm back at the computer now, and I wanted to clarify a thing about the flats. So when you take the flats, just point your camera up at a clean blue patch of sky, and then change the settings so that your histogram looks normal. And you should get an image that looks something like this here on the right, and I'm just going to demonstrate to you the importance of this. So here we have on the left one of our single 3-second exposures, and on the right a flat. And you can see in our single exposure that's not been calibrated, there's a bunch of vignetting in the corners. It's kind of gross, but after we calibrate it with the flat and the bias we took, we can see that it actually looks super duper clean, and that's what we're going after. If we don't do this, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle with your camera's vignetting or any dust that's on your sensor, and that's not a fun time. You don't want to challenge yourself in all those different ways. You should try to, do your due diligence, take the calibration frames to get the best image possible. Anyways, so after the course of the night, you saw I showed a time lapse there of all of the frames that I took. I ended up with 1,300 pictures, and I was only able to stack 1,200 of those images based on the storage left in my computer. That's one problem with this untracked imaging thing, is if you want the best image quality, you need tons of images, which then requires tons of space to do it properly. So the way I go about editing all those frames is I just use this script called the batch pre-processing script, and it's relatively simple to use. If you're doing this without PixInsight or any kind of free software, you could use something like Deep Sky Stacker, and it would work similarly to this. So in this case, all I do is I load up my light frames that I took. So in this case, there's 1,300, but for demonstration, I'm just gonna grab a couple of them. And you're gonna grab all the flats that you took, and then all the bias that you took. And again, I didn't take dark, so you don't need to worry about that. Since we are using images from a RGB or color camera, you're going to want to check CFA images, and this just means to color filter array an image. So it will go through and calibrate your images based off the raw sensor output. So there'll be a Bayer grid on them, and after calibration, it will actually CFA the images or de-Bayer them to make them color. Because think about it, your camera only takes black and white images. The pixels don't know what color they are until you tell them what color they are. And this step will tell them which color they belong to. And typically for most cameras, you're just going to want to go ahead and check RGB, and the de-Bayer method of VNG will work pretty well for you. So we don't want to check master anything. We want to check up bottom fits to keep the rotation the same. We're going to grab a reference image to align everything off of, and you're just going to want to pick a light frame where your object of interest is somewhere in the middle of what you picked, because again, it's going to be trailing across. So we're just going to want to pick a frame like this one where it's relatively well framed, and then specify an output directory wherever you want. So you let this run. Depending on how many images you have, this could be a very simple task. It could maybe take 5 minutes. For me, it took about 4 or 5 hours to go through and calibrate and stack everything because there was so many frames. So that was a bit of a challenge. One other thing you can look at here is image integration, the actual stacking part. You can actually integrate frames with the script and choose your parameters here, and that kind of saves you a step. So you can go ahead and check that as well and tune your parameters as you see fit. I like to keep this number a bit low to delete more satellite trails in Orion. So anyways, just let that run as you would, or use Deep Sky Stacker, whichever you prefer. I recommend PixInsight, of course, for doing this because it's a good program. Alrighty, so here's the image I got after the 5-ish hours of stacking, aligning, and calibrating, and in total we ended up with 1200 exposures used for the stacked image. And if we zoom in, we can see it's looking quite a bit better than just any of the individual subframes. So just zooming in here on a raw frame and the stacked image, we can see we pretty much got rid of a ton of the noise, and a lot of details that weren't visible before are definitely visible now. The usual adage in astrophotography is garbage in, garbage out. But if you wanted to be more specific, you could say millions of piles of garbage equal something not so garbage. Stacking and calibrating this image took a little over a terabyte of raw space to go through, so you're likely not going to have this much data to play with, but if you're going for the best image quality possible, this is what you would do. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and start editing this for you guys, and the first thing we are going to want to do is delete the light pollution gradient, which is a big problem. So you could either use DBE and PixInsight to do this, or you could use my favorite tool as of late, which is Astropixel Processor. And it has quite a bit easier, user-friendly, and better gradient removal tools than PixInsight does. So we're just going to go ahead and grab one of our frames. I saved it as a fit since Astropixel Processor won't take PixInsight's format. We're just going to open it up and start deleting the gradient. So to do that, we're going to go up to Tools here and remove light pollution. I'm going to hit yes. It's going to neutralize the background here, and then we can get a clear view of what our gradient is like. And there's a couple different sources of gradients you could have in your image. There could be light pollution, there could be moonlight, or if you didn't take flats, you could have gradients from that. But since we took flats, we don't have to deal with a very complex gradient. Our gradient is purely from light pollution and sky glow. So we're just going to go ahead and draw some boxes on our background so that Astropixel Processor knows where the gradient is and what it looks like. We're going to hit calculate, and we'll see what it does with this one iteration. And already that's looking pretty snazzy. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop a couple more samples here, like so, just to make sure we're all good. And then we should have a pretty good result for background removed image. So that looks good. I'm going to OK and save this. We're going to reopen it back up in PixInsight. So our colors are a bit off, and what I'm going to do to actually color balance this image is use a script from Hartman v. Borneman's PixInsight repository, and I'll link that in the description so you guys can download it and install it. But it has a lot of helpful tools for speeding up different parts of processing. So that's what I'm going to use next, is this auto color script from the separate PixInsight scripts. We're just going to run that, and this will take a little bit of a second, so we'll come back when this is done running. Okie doke, so our colors are all calibrated now. So we're going to go through and probably, I think, stretch this image first, and then work on enhancing some of the details and then saturating the colors. The main thing I'm concerned about is getting some of this dust to show up in the background, because it's very rare that you see this dust in an untracked image. So I'm going to be trying my best to pull that out. So first things first, let's stretch the image. I'm going to use probably a mix of different stretching techniques because we're imaging Orion, and I would really like to keep the trapezium here, which is already kind of blown out, but I would prefer to keep it not totally blown out. First, hit it with a round of histogram transformation just to get it going and get the middles of the stars to be a natural brightness. So you can see there's a little bit of pink, so I'm going to keep stretching to make that go away. And you can also see how much trailing there was with the exposure length I used. There's definitely quite a bit. We didn't keep the stars solely in 1 pixel, and I chose to do that so that we can get just a little bit more detail. So I'm going to stretch the image that much more, like so. Then the next thing I'm going to do is try to find a sample in the background of the image. Somewhere like right here is good to me. And I'm going to grab a process That's called masked stretch, and that should help us preserve a bit more of what's going on in Orion. So I'm going to give it this background reference and we'll see what it does to this image. Okay, so after that first stretch, things are looking pretty good. We have the core much more preserved relative to the rest of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and continue stretching it with the histogram transformation and just round off the stretch with that. And we should be able to preserve much more of the core that way than just using straight up histogram transforms, which would delete all of the detail there. So that's a very nice result to me. We're going to go ahead and save this as our stretched image. Next step to editing this image, I'm going to delete the stars from it so that I can help show the background nebula more. So I'm going to be using StarNet++ to do this process, and this will take a little while, so we're going to run this and we'll come back when it is starless. Okie doke, so StarNet worked pretty well on this, even though we had slightly trailed stars, and you can definitely see right off the bat that there's a lot more dust coming back into this image, which is good to see. Alrighty, so I have here the starless image with topaz denoise ran on it. I ended up going with the unstretched version since we had a gradient problem, and we're going to copy paste this onto the image with stars, and we're going to blend these together to show the background dust slightly more but still keep the stars. So I'm going to blend in the starless image at a reduced opacity, then we're going to grab the background image, blend it back in by lighten, and I'm going to then darken it with curves until we're only keeping the middle parts of the bright stars, or the medium-sized stars as well. And I'm actually going to mask away the effects of the starless image on these brighter stars to keep them looking natural, like so. And I'm also going to use this to mask away any effect it had on nebulas in the image, since it will also mess up nebula, especially brighter parts. We want to make sure we leave those untouched, especially M78 here. I'm also going to hit it with a little bit of curves just to see what it looks like. See what else we can pull off right here in the initial blend. That's looking pretty good to me. You can see we helped emphasize a lot of the larger scale detail and the faint dust that was hiding in the background. I'm also going to rotate this image because I will likely post it in this format here. We're definitely going to need to add some additional gradient reduction for that dark spot there. So let's go ahead and load this image again. So we'll just grab all our background samples. Paying closer attention now to these purple areas and these green areas that don't really look natural, especially in the corners and on the edges. Not such a great result there. We'll put more samples here on the right side of the image. That looks a million times better. I'm really happy with that. I'm just going to finish it off with a couple more samples. Okay, that's a really good result. I'm going to OK and save this. Our color balance definitely did get kind of warm, so I wonder if I can't just use the camera raw filter here to color balance it really quickly. Like so. Cool. Okay, looks like we're back at a normal solution for color balance. I'm going to use the technique that I used in my tutorial here, and we're going to use some high pass filtering to try to bring out some bigger structures like Barnard's loop here. So I'm going to hit it with a relatively large high pass filter, and then we're going to blend it back in by overlay. And you can see that made some areas of interest pop out a bit more. So let's blend that back in with a paintbrush to get the loop to show up a bit more. Some of the HA shows up a bit more. Faint dust. I do like these stars and the belts to be emphasized, as well as the feet of Orion, so we're going to blend that in. And if you want more of a description on the methodology of what I'm doing here, I do have another video describing it all in detail. I don't know if you guys saw from my Instagram post about whether or not I'll share workflows in a video. you can probably tell why. My workflow is really chaotic for every single image. It's not going to be the same every time, and a lot of the time I'm messing with new things I haven't done before, and at every step I might mess the whole image up, which doesn't really lend itself well to making a coherent video, but I find it gives me better pictures in the long run if I'm more willing to just mess around with every single picture and just see what happens, rather than go with some kind of a canned workflow. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is probably add some contrast here with luminosity masks, just by copy pasting the luminance of the image and making it a mask. And I'm going to run some curves here just to improve our contrast and our detail. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is use a technique I have to add kind of a glowiness to the images, which I'm going to do that by adding a Gaussian blur on top of a duplicated layer here. Then we're going to blend this in by screen, and we're going to adjust the levels of this image until it's just the nebula is popping out, and we're going to reduce the opacity of this because it doesn't look very natural in some parts of the image. Just like that. And again, I'm going to mask this away on the Orion Nebula, especially since we're clipping, and the Running Man and the Horsehead and the Flame where it's all clipped, and the middle of M78. All right, now I'm going to see what I can do with the color. So I'm just going to hit Control U and attempt to saturate the image in some places. Of course, it's going to be really noisy, so we're going to have to do a lot of masking again. That's a frequent theme that you're going to see popping up if you try to shoot untracked, is everything's going to be really noisy, and there's nothing you can do about it except buy a tracker and don't do this. So you can see there's some large scale color noise in a bunch of places. I'm going to have to mask away some weirdness in the corners. I'm going to do a reduced opacity here on Barnard's loop so it looks natural. All right, that's actually looking okay. I'm going to flatten this, and I'm going to try to make some of these bigger stars look a bit nicer using Star Spikes Pro. I know a bunch of you are going to get really angry at me for using this, but this is art, not science. So if you don't like Star Spikes, then you should examine yourself and why you get so mad at what other people do. But we're just going to maybe not, I don't want to include the actual diffraction spikes, but I want to increase the secondary halo or the soft flare effect just so these look more natural. I'm not trying to add star spikes to this. I don't think it would look particularly nice in this image, but I would like these stars to look normal. So that's how I'm going to use it. We'll go ahead and okay that. And I'm going to mask out its effect on Orion because that's not a star. Anyways, that looks like a pretty much finished image to me. I'm going to make some final touch-ups to this, but hopefully this gives you kind of a rough idea of a workflow if you're going to attempt to try this at home. And if you do attempt to try this at home, I'm so sorry. I hope it works out for you, and I hope your hard drives don't die in the process. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this. I hope you find it helpful. And if you actually go through and shoot an untracked image, go ahead and tag me on Instagram at Astrophotography so I can take a look and see what you created. So hope you guys enjoyed.